My name is Hannah. I'm 19. And in February of 2023, I was babysitting for a family in Overland Park, Kansas, the Whitfields, watching their 2-year-old son Eli on a Friday night while they went to a work dinner. I'd sat for them probably a dozen times by then, so the routine was second nature. Mrs. Whitfield walked me through the usual checklist on her way out the door. Eli's sippy cup only half full before bed, the hallway nightlight, the fact that he sometimes woke around midnight wanting water and went right back down after. Eli went down for bed around 8 after his usual fight over pajamas, and I settled into the living room with my homework and the baby monitor propped on the coffee table. Volume up, screen facing me. The first 2 hours were exactly like every other time I'd sat for them. I did some reading for a psych class, ate the leftover pasta they told me I could have, and checked the monitor screen out of habit every few minutes. Eli just a small shape under his blanket, occasionally shifting, once rolling onto his stomach, the way he always fought to sleep, even though his parents kept trying to train him out of it. The house had that specific quiet a house gets once a kid's finally down, just the refrigerator humming and the occasional car passing outside. Nothing about the night felt different. I remember specifically thinking it was a boring shift, which in hindsight is exactly why I noticed it when something wasn't. Around 10:15, I glanced at the monitor and saw the closet door in Eli's room, which had been shut all night, standing open about a foot. I told myself one of us must have left it that way earlier and I just hadn't noticed, since closet doors don't open themselves, and I wasn't about to spiral over it. I went back to my homework. 15 minutes later, I looked again, and the door was open all the way, and there was a shape at the edge of the frame near it, low to the ground, that hadn't been there before. My first thought was that it was the family's cat, which I knew got shut in rooms sometimes. I actually said out loud to nobody, "It's just the cat," because saying it made it feel more true. I watched for another minute and the shape didn't move at all, which cats don't really do. They shift and resettle constantly. My hands had gone cold holding the monitor. I got up and walked to Eli's door, which I'd left cracked, and pushed it open slowly. The closet door was fully open, and for a second I couldn't see anything unusual, until my eyes adjusted and I realized there was a person crouched inside the closet, an adult, still and silent, watching the crib from maybe 6 feet away. I didn't scream first. I grabbed Eli out of the crib in one motion, and that's when the person lunged. He got a hand on my arm as I turned for the door, and I swung my elbow back hard enough to connect with something, I don't know what, and kept moving. I got Eli and myself into the hallway and slammed the bedroom door, holding the handle with my whole body weight while I screamed for help and fumbled my phone out with my free hand. I heard the closet, then footsteps, then the window in that room sliding open fast, like he was leaving through it instead of coming through the door after us. A neighbor who'd heard me screaming was already outside by the time I got Eli and myself out the front door, and she called 911 while I stood in the yard shaking. Eli crying against my shoulder, both of us in socks on the cold driveway because there hadn't been time to grab shoes. Police found the man 2 streets over within 20 minutes, matching my description, with a fresh cut on his forearm that lined up with where I'd hit him. He'd apparently been inside the house for at least part of the evening before I ever noticed the closet door, based on how he answered their questions. And one officer told Mrs. Whitfield later that a side window off the laundry room had a broken latch that hadn't been broken the last time anyone checked it. The Whitfields never had me watch Eli in that house again. They moved within the year, and I don't do overnight sits anymore, only shifts where I'm gone before a kid's actual bedtime. I'm Derek, I'm 22, and this happened in September of 2022 in a rental house outside Spokane, Washington, where I was babysitting two kids, a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, for a couple named the Ochoas. I'd only sat for them twice before, so I was still getting used to their house. An older place, with a basement that had its own separate door from the kitchen, painted shut and boarded across the bottom, which Mrs. Ochoa mentioned once in passing, saying the door didn't open and I shouldn't worry about it. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of old houses have a basement nobody uses. The kids and I had a completely normal evening. We ordered a pizza, watched part of a movie, and I got them into bed a little after their bedtime because the older one negotiated an extra 15 minutes, which felt like a very normal kid thing to deal with. By 9:30, both of them were asleep, and I was on the couch with the TV low, scrolling my phone. Nothing unusual going on at all. Around 11, I heard a knock from somewhere in the kitchen. 3 slow knocks, and I figured it was the ice maker or the pipes, since old houses make noise. And I'd already decided this house had a lot of personality in that department, based on how much the floors creaked. I didn't get up. The knocking came again 10 minutes later, and this time, it was clearly coming from the basement door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, deliberate, in a way pipes don't manage. I walked into the kitchen and stood in front of that door for a minute, telling myself it was probably just the house settling as the temperature dropped outside, which is a real thing that happens, and I really did believe that explanation right up until I heard the knock a 3rd time, with my hand almost touching the door. I pulled it back like I'd been shocked. The door was still painted shut and boarded at the bottom, exactly like Mrs. Ochoa described. So logically, nothing should have been able to get through it either way, which is the only reason I didn't immediately panic. I checked on both kids, who were sound asleep, then went back to the living room and texted Mrs. Ochoa, asking if maybe a pipe in the basement was known to bang around, trying to sound casual about it. She texted back fast, said there shouldn't be any knocking at all since the basement had been sealed off 2 tenants ago after some kind of dispute with the landlord, and asked if I was okay. I said yes, mostly because I didn't want to worry her at a wedding 3 states away. At around midnight, I heard the boards at the bottom of the door creak, then a scraping sound, wood against wood, like something was working at the boards from the other side. I got both kids up, half asleep and confused, and moved us all into the primary bedroom, which had a lock, and I called 911 from in there, telling them a possible break-in was in progress. We sat on the bed together in the dark while I kept my hand over the older kid's mouth to keep her quiet, not out of malice, just pure instinct to keep us silent. Police arrived within 10 minutes, and I heard them clear the house room by room from where we were locked in. When they got to the kitchen, one of the officers called out that the basement door had a section of board pried loose at the bottom corner, enough for an arm to reach through, though not enough for a person to get in. They searched the basement itself through an outside hatch and found a sleeping bag and food wrappers down there, along with a crawl space connecting to the house next door, which had been vacant for months. They never caught whoever it was, but the officer told me before he left that this wasn't the first call like it on that street. The Ochoas had the basement door replaced with steel within the month, and they still asked me to sit for them, but I always ask first if anything's changed about that basement before I say yes. My name's Ashley. I'm 24, and in May of 2021, I was babysitting for a family in Naperville, Illinois, the Doyles, watching their 2 kids, 5 and 8 years old. While both parents were out at a work event they said would run late. I'd sat for this family for almost a year by then and had Mrs. Doyle's number saved, along with a group text we used for logistics, drop-off times, snack preferences, that kind of thing. The night started completely normal, dinner, some cartoons. A minor argument between the kids over whose turn it was to pick the show. Resolved the way it always is, with me picking something neutral myself. Around 7:30, I got a text from Mrs. Doyle's number saying she'd left her office key at home and asking me to check under the front doormat for a spare and leave it on the porch railing for a coworker who'd swing by to grab it. It read a little oddly, more formal than her usual text, but I figured she was typing quickly between conversations at whatever event she was at, so I didn't think much of it. I found the spare key under the mat exactly where the text said it would be, which felt like it confirmed the message was legitimate, and I set it on the railing like asked. About 20 minutes later, a second text came through asking if the kids were already down. Phrased strangely again, using their full names instead of the nicknames she always used. I told myself she was just distracted or typing on her phone one-handed while balancing a drink at some function. A boring explanation that let me get back to the kids' bedtime routine without dwelling on it. By 8:15, both kids were in bed and I was in the living room when a third text came in telling me to make sure the porch light stayed off for the night since it was, quote, drawing bugs onto the camera lens, which struck me as an unusual level of detail for a random Tuesday. I decided to just call her instead of texting back, mostly to ask something normal about the coworker pickup, and she picked up sounding confused, saying she hadn't sent any texts all evening and hadn't asked about any spare key or the porch light. She said her phone had been in her purse the entire time. I checked the porch immediately, and the spare key I'd left on the railing was gone. I locked the front door, which I'd unlocked earlier to leave the key out, and started walking through the downstairs, turning on every light, telling Mrs. Doyle over the phone what was happening as I went. She told me to call 911 and that she and her husband were already leaving to come home. While I was on the line with the dispatcher standing in the kitchen, I saw a shape move past the side window that faces the driveway, close enough that motion sensor light over the garage kicked on and lit them up for maybe 2 full seconds. A man in dark clothes, not running, just walking at a normal pace, like he had every reason to be there. I told the dispatcher exactly what I'd seen and where, and she kept me on the line while I moved upstairs to be near the kids' rooms, both still somehow asleep through all of it. Police arrived within about 8 minutes and found a man 2 houses down, walking away at that same unhurried pace, matching what I'd described down to the jacket. He had the spare key in his jacket pocket. They arrested him on the spot in view of the Doyles, who pulled into the driveway right as it happened. And he admitted to the officers, once he was in the back of the patrol car, that he'd been texting me from a phone he'd taken off Mrs. Doyle weeks earlier at a coffee shop, without her ever noticing it missing since she had a second phone for work. The Doyles switched to a keypad lock the next week, and I still sit for them regularly. But I call to confirm literally everything now, no matter how normal the text sounds.